Emily sat alone in the dimly lit living room of their small suburban home. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one echoing the silence that had settled over the house since James's death. The television, muted and uninteresting, flickered in the background, casting erratic shadows on the walls. She wrapped herself in a knitted blanket, her fingers trembling, holding a steaming mug of tea that had long since gone cold. It had been 6 months since the accident. Emily's life had become a silent movie, replaying the moments of loss and loneliness. Every corner of their home, once filled with laughter and love, now seemed like a distant memory, a dream from which she had yet to wake. As the hands of the clock moved towards midnight, Emily's phone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet like a knife. She jumped, spilling some of her cold tea onto her lap. Her heart raced as she reached for the phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. The name on the caller ID was unknown. Hesitant, she pressed the answer button. "Hello," she said, her voice shaky, barely above a whisper. A crackling silence followed, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Then, through the static, a voice emerged, soft, familiar, and hauntingly clear. "Emily, it's me, James." Emily's grip tightened on the phone. She stared at it, her mind reeling. "This isn't funny. Who is this?" she demanded, her voice a mix of confusion and fear. The voice on the other end was insistent, urgent. "Emily, it's really me. I need to tell you something important. I was murdered. It wasn't an accident." The world around Emily seemed to collapse. Her vision blurred and the room spun. She sank back into the couch, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. James's words echoed in her head, each one more terrifying than the last. She couldn't understand how this could be possible. How could he be speaking to her from beyond the grave? Before she could muster the strength to respond, the line went dead, leaving her in complete darkness. The phone slipped from her grasp, landing on the coffee table with a soft thud. Emily sat there, staring at the empty screen, her mind a storm of disbelief and terror. The room was silent once more, but the air felt thick with the weight of James's words. Was this some cruel joke, or was it really James, reaching out from beyond the grave? Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and confusion, each one more disturbing than the last. Emily glanced around the room, her eyes falling on the framed photograph of her and James on their wedding day, a stark contrast to the nightmare unfolding before her. She picked up the photo, holding it close, the reality of his absence sinking in deeper than ever. She clutched the photograph, her tears mingling with the memories as she realized that something sinister was now a part of her life, something that could not be explained away by grief or imagination. Determined to find answers, Emily knew she had to dig deeper. The phone call had shattered her world, and the truth, whatever it was buried somewhere in the dark recesses of James's past. She had to find out who had killed him and why. But as the clock struck midnight again, the chilling realization dawned upon her. The calls were just beginning, and so was the nightmare. The next day, Emily's thoughts were consumed by the mysterious midnight call. She replayed the conversation over and over in her mind, the words echoing like a haunting melody. Could it really have been James? The possibility seemed too surreal to accept, yet too disturbing to dismiss. Emily decided to start with the police report from the accident. She rummaged through the drawer in her study, where she kept all the documents related to James's death. Her hands shook as she pulled out the folder labeled Accident Report. Sitting at her desk, she opened it and began to read. The report detailed how James's car had veered off the road and crashed into a tree late at night. There were no witnesses, and the cause was listed as driver error. But now, with James's words lingering in her mind, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She needed more information, something that would corroborate or refute the chilling claim from the call. Emily decided to visit the accident site. The spot where James had died was on a quiet, winding road just outside of town. She hadn't been there since the day of the crash, unable to face the reality of his death. As she drove, her heart pounded, and her palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. The landscape outside blurred as her mind raced with thoughts of what she might find. When she arrived, the scene was eerily peaceful. The tree that James's car had hit stood tall, its bark scarred from the impact. She stepped out of her car and walked slowly toward it, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. Emily knelt down and examined the ground, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. Her eyes fell on a piece of broken glass partially buried in the dirt. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand. It was a shard from a headlight, but it didn't match the make of James's car. A chill ran down her spine as she realized it must have come from another vehicle, one that hadn't been mentioned in the report. Had there been another car involved in the crash? Was it the key to understanding what really happened that night? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of rustling leaves. She turned to see a man standing a few feet away, watching her. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and worn clothes. His eyes were dark and penetrating, making her uneasy. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Emily stood up, clutching the piece of glass. "I'm just visiting the site. My husband died here." The man nodded slowly. "I remember. Saw the wreck that night. Strange, though. Didn't seem like an accident to me." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Saw another car speeding away right after the crash. Never told the cops. Didn't want to get involved. But now, maybe I should have." Emily's mind raced. "Do you remember anything about the car? The license plate? The make? Anything?" The man shook his head. "It was dark, but it was definitely a sedan, black maybe. Sorry, that's all I got." Emily thanked him and watched as he walked away, disappearing into the trees. The piece of glass felt heavy in her hand, a tangible connection to the mystery surrounding James's death. She knew she had to find out more about that other car and its driver. Someone out there knew the truth, and she was determined to uncover it. That night, Emily sat at her computer, searching through online forums and local news archives. She looked for any mention of a black sedan in the area around the time of the crash. Hours passed, and just as she was about to give up, she found a thread discussing a series of hit-and-runs involving a black sedan. One of the posts mentioned a man named David, who had been investigating the incidents on his own. Emily contacted David, hoping he could provide some insight. She explained her situation, leaving out the part about the phone call. To her surprise, he agreed to meet with her the next day. When they met at a local cafe, David was a middle-aged man with a tired expression and a weary demeanor. He listened intently as Emily recounted the details of James's accident and the mysterious car. "I've been trying to track down that black sedan for months," David said. "I'm certain it's involved in more than just a few accidents. There's a pattern, but I can't quite piece it all together." Emily felt a glimmer of hope. "Do you think it's possible that the driver of that car murdered my husband?" David nodded. "It's a possibility. Whoever is behind the wheel seems to have a history of making people disappear." Emily shivered at the thought. "What do we do now?" David leaned forward, his eyes serious. "We need to find that car and its driver. It's the only way to get to the bottom of this. I have some leads, but it's going to be dangerous. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emily took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. "I have to do this, for James." As they left the cafe, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The night air was cool and the streets were quiet, but the sense of foreboding was undeniable. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but she knew she had to follow it, no matter where it led. The truth was out there, and she was determined to find it, even if it meant putting her own life at risk. Emily and David embarked on their quest to uncover the identity of the mysterious driver of the black sedan. Their first step was to visit the locations of the previous hit-and-run incidents. David had compiled a list of these places, and they planned to visit each one to search for any overlooked evidence or witnesses who might provide new information. Their first stop was a narrow street in a quiet residential neighborhood where a young cyclist had been hit a few months earlier. They walked up and down the street looking for security cameras on nearby houses. After knocking on several doors, they found a resident who remembered the accident and agreed to check his footage from that night. The footage was grainy, but they could make out a dark sedan speeding away from the scene. Next, they visited a parking lot where an elderly man had been struck while walking to his car. They found a surveillance camera on a nearby store, but the manager refused to cooperate without a warrant. Frustrated but undeterred, they continued their search, visiting each location on their list. At each place, they encountered obstacles, uncooperative witnesses, missing footage, and dead ends. Despite the setbacks, they managed to gather a few more pieces of the puzzle. A pattern began to emerge. The black sedan appeared to be targeting specific individuals, but the reasons for the attacks were unclear. Emily and David theorized that the driver might be a hitman or someone with a personal vendetta. One evening, while they were reviewing their findings in David's cramped apartment, Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging or you'll end up like your husband." Her blood ran cold as she showed the message to David. "We must be getting close," David said grimly. "This is a warning." Undeterred, Emily suggested they focus on finding the car. David agreed and proposed they visit a local mechanic he knew, who might have information about a black sedan with recent repairs. The mechanic, a grizzled old man named Joe, was initially hesitant but opened up after David slipped him some cash. Joe recalled a black sedan that had come in for repairs a few weeks after James's accident. The driver had been nervous and in a hurry. Joe didn't have the name of the driver, but he remembered the license plate number. Emily felt a surge of hope. With this new lead, they could potentially track down the owner of the car. They ran the license plate through an online database and discovered it was registered to a man named Richard Lawson, a local businessman with no criminal record. Something about the name seemed familiar to Emily, but she couldn't quite place it. They decided to stake out Richard's house, hoping to catch him leaving in the black sedan. For several nights they watched from a distance, but there was no sign of the car. Just as they were about to give up, they saw a black sedan pull into the driveway late one night. Emily's heart raced as they watched Richard step out of the car and enter his house. David suggested they follow Richard the next day to see where he went. The following morning, they tailed him as he drove to various locations around town. Their patience paid off when they saw him meet with a man in a dark alley. Using binoculars, they managed to catch a glimpse of the other man's face. It was John, Emily's brother-in-law. The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Could John be involved in James's death? The pieces started to fall into place. John had always been close to the family, but there had been tension between him and James in the months leading up to the accident. Emily recalled overhearing heated arguments about money and business deals gone wrong. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Emily and David devised a plan to confront John. They would gather more evidence to ensure their accusations would stick. They decided to break into Richard's office that night, hoping to find incriminating documents. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped into the building. Emily's hands shook as she picked the lock on the office door. Once inside, they searched through files and drawers, finally finding a folder labeled Contracts. Inside, they discovered documents linking Richard and John to several suspicious deals, including a large sum of money transferred shortly after James's death. With the evidence in hand, Emily felt both relief and dread. She now knew the truth, but confronting John would be dangerous. She and David made copies of the documents and planned their next move. They would take the evidence to the police the following morning. However, as they left the building, they heard footsteps approaching. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. They ducked into a shadowy corner, holding their breath as two men walked by. One of them was Richard, and the other was John. Emily's heart pounded as she overheard their conversation, confirming their involvement in James's death and their intention to eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth. Emily and David managed to escape unnoticed, but the danger was now greater than ever. They had the evidence, but getting it to the authorities without being intercepted was a daunting task. Emily's thoughts raced as she tried to devise a plan. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Emily and David knew they had to act quickly. They had the evidence to expose John and Richard, but getting it to the police without being intercepted was a significant challenge. They decided to split up. David would take the evidence to the authorities while Emily would create a diversion to distract John and Richard. Emily contacted a trusted friend, Lisa, who worked at the local newspaper. She explained the situation and asked Lisa to meet her at a cafe near the police station. Lisa agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. Emily's plan was to give Lisa a copy of the evidence, ensuring there was a backup in case anything happened to David. Early the next morning, Emily and David reviewed their plan one last time. David tucked the folder with the incriminating documents into his backpack, and they parted ways. Emily's heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. She knew this could be the most dangerous day of her life. Emily arrived at the cafe first and sat near the window, watching for Lisa. She spotted her friend approaching and breathed a sigh of relief. Lisa joined her at the table, and Emily quickly explained the importance of the documents. Lisa promised to hold on to them and contact the authorities if anything went wrong. Meanwhile, David made his way to the police station, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, but he pressed on, determined to see the plan through. As Emily and Lisa finished their conversation, Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It read, "We know what you're doing. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Emily showed the message to Lisa, who urged her to stay strong. Suddenly, Emily spotted a black sedan pulling up across the street. Her stomach dropped as she saw John and Richard step out of the car. They were looking around, clearly searching for someone. Emily knew she had to act fast to protect herself and Lisa. Emily told Lisa to leave through the back door and head straight to the police station. She would create a diversion to draw John and Richard away. Lisa hesitated but finally agreed, squeezing Emily's hand before she left. Emily exited the cafe and walked toward a crowded marketplace nearby, hoping to lose herself in the throng of people. She glanced back and saw John and Richard following her. Her pulse quickened as she maneuvered through the crowd, ducking into narrow alleys and weaving between stalls. Despite her efforts, John and Richard stayed on her trail. She needed to think of something fast. She spotted a construction site up ahead and darted inside, hoping the maze of scaffolding and equipment would slow them down. She hid behind a stack of crates, trying to catch her breath. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard footsteps approaching. She peeked out and saw John and Richard searching the site, their expressions furious. Emily knew she couldn't hide forever. She spotted a metal pipe nearby and picked it up, bracing herself for a confrontation. John rounded the corner first, and Emily swung the pipe, hitting him in the leg. He stumbled and fell, cursing in pain. Richard rushed toward her, but Emily managed to evade him, using the scaffolding to her advantage. She climbed up to a higher level, hoping to buy more time. From her vantage point, Emily saw David arriving at the police station. Relief washed over her, but she knew she wasn't out of danger yet. Richard was still chasing her, and John was getting back on his feet. She had to keep them distracted a little longer. Emily made her way across the scaffolding, moving as quickly as she could. She reached the edge of the site and saw a small gap between the scaffolding and a nearby building. It was risky, but she had no other choice. She took a deep breath and jumped, barely making it to the other side. She scrambled to her feet and ran through the building, bursting out into the street on the other side. She looked back and saw Richard struggling to follow, but she had gained some distance. She sprinted toward the police station, her only thought being to reach safety. David was waiting outside the station, talking to an officer. Emily waved frantically, catching their attention. The officer motioned for her to hurry, and she ran as fast as she could. Just as she reached the station steps, she heard a gunshot. Pain exploded in her side, and she fell to the ground, gasping for breath. David and the officer rushed to her side, calling for an ambulance. Emily's vision blurred as she tried to speak. She could see John and Richard being apprehended by the police, but her relief was overshadowed by the searing pain. As the paramedics arrived and lifted her onto a stretcher, Emily felt her consciousness slipping away. She had done everything she could to expose the truth, but it had come at a terrible cost. She hoped that David and Lisa would ensure that justice was served, even if she didn't survive to see it. Emily's last thought was of James, and she hoped that her actions had honored his memory. The world faded to black, and she knew that her fight was over.